Where do we go from there? We go to Mike Sewell asks, question for Dave, September 2022. Hey there, Manly Matt. Are they actually calling you that now?
Some people. I mean, I sign everything Manly if I can remember to do it. Sometimes I'll only put Manly.
Right. Well, if you do it often enough, I'm sure allow themselves to be battered into submission. Question for Dave. I couldn't help but notice a vast number of comics are printed in Canada. Question: is Dave Sim the reason so many comics are printed in Canada? Oh, sure. Blame it on me. I think we would have to go back and research that if somebody was interested as to when did DC and Marvel decide to print the majority of their titles at Quebecor. The questions that Mike has then. Cost of kindly labor. That would be an interesting question as well. I don't know if Quebecor is a organized labor shop or a not organized labor shop. Quebec tends to have a lot of both kinds, and they both tend to be very firmly entrenched. Knowing the president, longtime president of Quebecor, who had a real presence in Canada and a real presence in Quebec, and I would suspect that it was a non-labor shop. Quality of socialist paper, as Eddie Campbell figured out when he was self-publishing, you print where the trees are, and that's Canada. That's maybe going the way of all flesh as well, because individual communities are going, not in my backyard. Paper mills pollute rivers to an unconscionable degree in the eyes of environmentalists, but then everything pollutes the environment in the eyes of environmentalists. They're really advocates of preventing microaggressions against Mother Nature, which it's very difficult to actually run a civilization by limiting your microaggressions against Mother Nature. I think Mother Nature was put here by God for us to make use of, and we can dirty up our crib, but it's still a pretty high quality crib. That's why God made it that way. Canadian OCT persnicketyness. That figures in, I think. One of those people who go into the print business just about anywhere, but particularly in Canada, definitely bring their persnickety A game to printing. But going back to at some point, DC and Marvel decided to print all of their books at Quebecor, and I'm sure that was they called it Ronald's. I think Quebecor had a schizophrenic. We're Ronald's to the Americans, and we're Quebecor to the Canadians and the Quebecois, because we really don't want to hear how Americans would pronounce Quebecor left to their own devices. It would just be too painful for the Quebecois. But my recollection is that DC and Marvel started printing at Quebecor because of the exchange rate, which hit its optimum at almost 50-cent dollars early in the 2000s. But they made the decision before that. My gut instinct, to the best of my recollection, DC and Marvel were both still distributing on newsstands and in comic book stores when they started printing at Quebecor, which got into okay, what's our logistics in terms of how we get these books to market. These books we have to figure out how to get to Capital City in Madison, Wisconsin. These books we have to get to Baltimore, Maryland. These books we have to get to Longhorn in Texas. These books we have to get to Bud Plant. These books back when there was multiple distributors, and we have to get these to the ID distributors who will then sub-distribute to all of the newsstands. That was a complicated enough question that I think they printed at Quebecor, but then broke down the distribution side of it from there and went, okay, this is where all of the books go to, and then they get broken down into these shipments, and this is the most logical place for all of them to go first, and then from there to all the different points that they had to get to. Then the exclusive wars took place where Diamond knocked everybody out of the business, and it's like, okay, we now only have to get these books to Diamond, and by that point, the newsstands, if they even still existed, were a minor concern. All of these books are going to Baltimore, Maryland, or one of the name ring places, and possibly to the different Diamond warehouses. Time when Diamond had a good dozen or so warehouses of the different distributors went out of business, and Diamond took over their distribution warehouses, leases and whatnot. And then I think there has been a migration. I'm not sure if it's thoroughgoing and completely, where Le Bon Enfant started taking over a lot of the business because they were in Val d'Or, Quebec, which was right across the river from Plattsburgh, and Plattsburgh was where Diamond had their warehouse, so everything could just be trucked across the border to Diamond and dumped there, and then Diamond distributed all the comic books from there. I think, and this is where my personal role in the history is non-existent, I think at that point Quebecor became an unworkable monolith to be dealing with. This was fine when we were having to get all of these books multiple different places. Now that we just have to get them across the river from Val d'Or to Plattsburgh, I think at that point pretty much everybody started printing at Le Bon Enfant. Le Bon Enfant couldn't handle the volume of work and got into financial trouble, and then got taken over by Marquis, and Marquis has just been plugged into the whole system from then on. But again, the end game on that, I wasn't in on that. I think about the only is Dave Sim the reason so many comics are printed in Canada? My role in that would have been, well, okay, Prenny Print and Litho is going out of business, and all of the self-publishers print at Prenny Print and Litho. Where's Dave Sim going? Wherever Dave Sim is going, that's where we're going. And Dave Sim ended up going to Le Bon Enfant because that seemed to be where everybody else was going. I don't think Marvel and DC at the time, but Dark Horse, IDW, all of these places were going, okay, they got a good price for the size of print runs that we're doing. Some of the print runs, their prices are better than others, but you really can't beat that. Just, truck it across the St. Lawrence, and there it is in New York State, and we're all done. We can go back across the river and work on printing next month's book.
I very much was wrong in my supposition. I was figuring the answer was, well, back in the 20s, all the printing was in Canada because that's where the bootleggers were using. Bootleggers were using printed books to hide all the liquor, but I was wrong, completely wrong.
No, that's probably prehistory that I don't know anything about. He was asking about the reason that so many comics are printed in Canada. That's probably the answer to that question from.
I just grabbed a random comic I had from the 80s from Marvel, and it says printed in the United States, and I'm thinking, okay, well, that kind of shoots the Canada theory for bootlegging. I'm sure it's a factor. Like, the reason there's a lot of print shops in Canada was that they were set up back then, if they're legacy, they were set up back then because A, there's trees, and B, there's lots of water. There's everything we need to print, to make paper and then print, and then, it's one of those, why are there so many roads in Detroit? Well, this is where we started making cars.
Right, exactly.
I mean, the first paved road in North America was put in place in Detroit, and it starts at the end of the assembly line at Ford and goes from there because Henry Ford didn't want people buying a car from him and then it being bumpy right away. So, like, the first, I think it's 5 or 10 miles of road in America were from the end of the assembly line until you got into Detroit proper, and it was, okay, now you're on your own.
And hopefully you'll forget where you got this car so you don't bring it back and go, look at my suspension. What the hell happened to my suspension? I've only had this thing for 48 hours.
But the other reason I think there might be so much printing in Canada is partially it's the not in my backyard, we don't want a paper mill. Down in America, most of the printing plants down here probably were driven out of business, and it was, well, where are they still letting us pollute the river? And it's up north.
Yeah. We'll see how long that's going to go on. It's one of those. I think the environmentalists are coming to the end of people actually listening every time that they say that the sky is falling. It's like we can work on this. I'm sure we can figure out a way to make paper that definitely diminishes the amount of pollution that's involved. It would be great if Kindle had worked the way they had hoped that it would. The environmentalists are also the Kindle people, but it's no, we're not getting rid of paper books anytime soon, or paper magazines, or paper newspapers. I appreciate your enthusiasm, but it's the same as if we had stayed on track with liquefied natural gas in Canada and the United States, building pipelines for it, exporting it. Germany, would not be facing Vladimir Putin deciding how much warmth they get this winter. I mean, if you're one of those people who prays to God for things, definitely pray to God for a mild winter in Germany this year.
Well, one of the things that, one of the big environmental things that J. Michael Straczynski figured out in his Rising Stars series was, the superheroes take over the Earth, and one of the things they say is the outflow pipe from your factory has to be upstream from your intake, so whatever you're putting in the water, you're sucking back up, because that is your incentive to keep the water as clean as possible. And I read that when it came out, I read it and went, that's one of them genius ideas that nobody ever thought of until it was too late. Like, if you put the intake downstream from the output, yeah, you're not going to be kicking chemicals into the water, because any chemicals you kick in, you're going to be sucking up, and if they mess the machines up,
or you'll figure out a way to clean it at least to a livable level. Yeah.
I mean, as somebody at work constantly says, "Hey, no brains, no headaches."
That's true.